Hello and welcome to another episode of the Hawks Nest. Well, we finally get to rejoice. Don't we, Seahawks fans? It has been one hell of a long off season. No great free agent signings, no big trades, not even any re-signings of our current players, really. I mean, Nico Thorpe doesn't exactly move my needle, you know what I mean? But today I woke up and in my messages, we finally got delivered some great news, and as great a news as we're going to get this offseason. Russell Wilson has signed an extension with the Seahawks. Yay! And not only that, as you dive into the numbers on the deal, because we've had so much speculation in regards to that, does he want a percentage of the cap? Does he want it constantly moving up per what the cap is? No, at the end of the deal, he actually gave the Seahawks a hometown discount. And let me unpack this a little bit because I know everybody out there goes, but wait, he's being paid the highest paid contract of any quarterback in the league. How can that be a hometown discount? I shall explain. Everyone's reporting this as on the 4-year extension to his own old deal as a $35 million per year deal. But nobody's factoring in the final year of his other deal that was still remaining that he goes into on this year. Because of that final year of that deal, and because there's no bonus money attached with this final year of that deal, we're able to take this new money and slightly massage it into that final year. Thus, bringing his average year per on this full contract, full 5 years of this deal, all the way down to $31.5 million on an average year per basis. So when you look at that, it's easy for me to understand and to say, when we were looking at potentially him having to sign at $40 million to get him at the table and to get him going, and now we're down to 31.5, I'm going to consider that a win and I'm going to celebrate it. So don't let there be any controversy surrounding this deal. Don't let anybody tell you nationally that it's silly to pay a quarterback like this at this point. It's a great deal for us. It's a great deal for the team. And most importantly, it's a great deal for Russell Wilson. All right, so you're John Snyder. You've just re-signed your franchise quarterback after some long, strained negotiations. What's the next move that you're going to make? Well, naturally, you go get that quarterback a bright, new, shiny toy. And where do you get that toy? In the draft. One of the stories that's flown a little bit under the radar this offseason has been the Seahawks' quiet, silent need at wide receiver. Doug Baldwin just had his third surgery of the offseason on a sports hernia, and this is a guy who's had some mild flirtations with retirement in the past. Doug may not be long for the NFL world. And the Seahawks management seemed to recognize this because early on in the free agent process, we brought Jordy Nelson in for a visit. And Jordy, though he was getting a little long in the tooth, actually had a very good year working out of the slot for the Oakland Raiders last year. It would have been a very natural fit to move him in, and if Doug took a little bit of extra time in his rehab or decided to finally just retire, you had a little bit of a hedge in place if that were to happen. Unfortunately, it didn't appear that Snyder offered Jordy what his asking price was, so Jordy went back home to Kansas and promptly retired. But Seattle did kind of show their hand here a little bit. It shows they recognize that they have a needed wide receiver, but yet they didn't so much as sniff at any of the wide receiver free agent class. Now, granted, this was not a very good class for free agent wide receivers and hasn't been so for a few years now, but still, by this train of thought, we can logically deduce that they're probably going to then pick up this wide receiver in the draft, and probably sooner rather than later. This is furthered when you back this up with the 2 visits that the Seahawks scheduled pre-draft with wide receiver prospects Paris Campbell and N'Keal Harry. In the past, when the Seahawks have tended to have a prospect out, it's not a smokescreen to make teams think they're interested in a prospect that they're not. It's actually they're that interested in a prospect. They want to see how the prospect comes into the VMAC and interacts with the rest of the Seahawks team because there's a certain type of player and a certain type of mindset that they need to have if they're going to go into that building. So taking for granted that the Seahawks are going to pick a wide receiver in this draft, which receiver are they going to pick? Well, let's dive in and see if we can't look at the receivers they've picked in the past to extrapolate and look at as a template what kind of receivers they might be looking at in this draft. Over nearly the last decade, John Snyder has drafted 9 receivers. When looking at their physical traits and testing numbers, it would appear there are base requirements that the front office favors when it comes to wideouts. If we analyze these numbers, we can both eliminate certain prospects that don't foot the bill and then highlight the others that do. Over the course of his tenure with the Hawks, Snyder has picked Golden Tate, Chris Durham, Chris Harper, Kevin Norwood, Kenny Lawler, Paul Richardson, Tyler Lockett, Amara Darboh, and David Moore. The first thing that jumps out when first analyzing this list is Seattle favors receivers 6 feet and over, with only Tyler Lockett and Golden Tate being under that height. The Seahawks appear to have a firm 35-inch vertical leap minimum for all drafted receivers, with only Kevin Norwood and Kenny Lawler being the exceptions. It should be noted Lawler had nearly 34-inch long arms and was a late pick, which was probably why they overlooked these shortcomings in his case. Arm length also seems to be an important factor, as only 2 receivers had under 32-inch arms. Again, Lockett and Tate being the only exceptions. Hand size does not appear to be a determining factor, although there has been a recent trend towards receivers with larger 10-inch hands. When it comes to the athletic testing numbers, we're able to further narrow in on the front office's preferred traits. The Seahawks want receivers who run 4.5 and under. This appears a firm rule, as Chris Harper and Kenny Lawler are the only receivers who failed to break that mark. Broad jump appears to be another very important trait, as every receiver except Chris Harper and Kenny Lawler jumped a minimum of 120 inches or more. Weight doesn't seem to matter, as we've seen the spectrum of 175-pound Paul Richardson all the way up to Chris Harper at nearly 230. Bench press also doesn't appear to be an important factor. While they've certainly gone after receivers with great bench numbers, like David Moore's 26 reps at his pro day, they've also taken Paul Richardson and Kevin Norwood, the latter only managing 7 reps at the combine. So what are our baselines for potential receivers? If you remove the 2 outlier points of data, being Lockett and Tate's size and Chris Harper and Kenny Lawler's lack of speed and jumping ability, here is the archetype we arrive at. The Seahawks draft receivers 6 foot and up. The receiver should run 4.5 and under. They should have a broad jump of at least 120 inches and a minimum vertical leap of 35 inches. 32-inch long arms appears a prerequisite, and they prefer the hand size to be 9 inches and up. So we have our model for a Hawk receiver. How does it stack up against what's available in the draft? Quite bloody well. I'm going to go ahead and narrow in on the top 11 receivers in this draft, as I believe we will be getting one of these guys. But first, let's eliminate 2 right off the list. First up, DK Metcalf. This is a highly controversial receiver out of Mississippi who did not have a lot of production, but who set the combine ablaze with his numbers and his physical superiority, I guess. Now, we could go back and forth as to whether this would be a great prospect for the Seahawks, but I think it's a moot point, as I believe he will be going in the top 15, and it doesn't appear the Seahawks are going to be drafting in the top 15. Even if the Seahawks were drafting the top 15, I don't think DK Metcalf would be the pick they would make if they jumped up that high. So let's remove him right off the list. Next up, I'm going to take out Hollywood Brown out of Oklahoma. My reasoning here is pretty simple. He is 5'9" and 165 pounds. This is probably not going to get the job done for Seattle. They have never drafted a receiver this small, and they have never drafted a receiver this light. It's hard for me to believe that in a draft like this, when you have so many perfect prototypes to what they want as their prerequisite, that you would go outside of that to take a guy like this who has some heavy-duty knee injury concerns with that Liz Frank on that knee, which never gets better. Once we remove DK Metcalf and Hollywood Brown, this leaves us with 9 left. N'Keal Harry, A.J. Brown, Terry McLaurin, Kelvin Harmon, Deebo Samuel, Paris Campbell, Hakeem Butler, J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, and Riley Ridley. When first analyzing this list, the one thing that stood out to me was that there was so many receivers that fit the Hawk model in this year's draft. It was hard to pare this list down. They've got a lot of available guys to pick from that they're going to probably like as far as their physical profile goes. Now, with that said, there are a couple guys that we can remove, I think, right off the top and get this list down to 7. The first guy up on my list is going to be Kelvin Harmon. He's widely praised as potentially having the best hands in the draft, but unfortunately, he only ran a 4.6 40 at the combine. You pair this as well with only his 32.5-inch vertical leap and is a 117-inch broad jump, and it would seem that he doesn't have the physical characteristics that the Hawks normally look for when drafting a receiver. So I am going to remove him from the list. As well, I'm going to take Riley Ridley off. He ran a 4.5840 at the combine, and he matched this with a woeful, just barely got over 30 inches on his vertical. Now, all this might have been okay if he had a great short shuttle because he is a little bit smaller than, let's say, Kelvin Harmon, but then he went out and did a 4.28 20-yard shuttle, which was very close to what Kelvin Harmon did, which was not fast. Again, I just think the physical characteristics here are going to remove him from the list. All right, so we've got our top 7 receivers remaining. Now, I firmly do believe one of these 7 guys is going to be a Seattle Seahawk by the end of the draft. But I can also acknowledge that it's not much of a prediction to say that one of these 7 guys in this particular positional grouping will be a Hawk. So I'm going to try to narrow it down further and get even more specific. I think of these 7 guys, I'm going to take the top 3. I think one of these 3 guys is going to be a Hawk, and I think they're going to pick him within the first 2 rounds of this draft. I say that understanding we currently don't have a second-round pick, but we all know John Snyder is one crafty devil, and he's going to figure out a way to get a second-round pick because he always seems to. So with this acknowledged, who are the 3 guys? First on my list, N'Keal Harry. This is a very, very interesting prospect. When you watch his tape, it's just him jumping over corner after corner, stealing the ball away on deep throws. He looks effective in the red zone. They've got him on punt returns where I was seeing sort of shades of a young Dez Bryant. And again, he'd give us a player that we currently don't have on the roster. Everybody we've got right now is a little bit of a undersized or 5'11 type that's a little shifty, a little more speedy. This guy would give you a guy paired with Russell Wilson's ability on deep balls to really put it on the receiver because, let's face it, Russell on his throws deep tends to put the ball on the receiver to give the receiver a chance to catch it, as opposed to the old school method, which was always throw it out in front of the receiver and it's the receiver gets it or nobody gets it. Russ goes a little bit differently about his business with that, and I think it's because he can be so accurate on his deep ball as opposed to other quarterbacks who are just kind of sometimes winging it out there. So he'd be a great pairing, I think, with Russell Wilson's skill, and again, he'd give us a player we currently don't have on the roster. Next on my list is going to be Paris Campbell. Again, like N'Keal Harry, he was brought in on a pre-draft visit. And again, as I said before, I don't think that's a smokescreen. I think they are truly interested in prospects they bring in for a visit. And this is a guy who, again, would give us a different player that we don't currently have on the roster. Think Percy Harvin, think Tyreek Hill in his best case scenario, obviously. But think those type of players, that X factor that you can move around on offense, on fly sweeps, on bubble screens, that you can just get his hands in the ball into the hands. And I think this player is very much like that. I don't know if he's got the talent of those aforementioned players, but he's still very, very good. And I wouldn't have any problem with him as a pickup because he would give us another element to the offense that we don't necessarily have right now. Third up on my list is going to be Terry McLaurin. This guy was a very interesting prospect to watch the tape on because I think he's the most competitive receiver in this draft. And that was where the light bulb went on for me because I think quietly this is the guy that the Hawks are going to pick come draft day. There's just something about his game. He's got all the physical traits that they're looking for, so that's there. But it's almost like Doug Baldwin and Anquan Bolden had a baby. This would be what you got. Just a strong, stout guy that can go up and get the ball and do everything that you could want him to do in the offense, including blocking. I mean, just check out this play with his teammate Paris Campbell on a bubble screen. He destroys 2 blockers. I mean, he's an animal out there. And it was furthered with this when I found out that Doug Baldwin and him actually share an agent. And then Doug Baldwin happened to tweet this. Now, Doug and Terry both share an agent, so Doug was probably doing a little bit of repping for a fellow player who he shares an agent with. But with that said, Doug, I think in the past has made similar type tweets that has shown himself to be quite the psychic when it comes to players the Hawks might be taking a look at. And with Terry, it's not hard to see. He hits all the physical traits that they want in their receivers, but then he's got this edge of competitiveness that you know is just going to tickle the right spot on Pete Carroll. So look for him to also be on the board. One of these 3 guys, N'Keal Harry, Paris Campbell, Terry McLaurin. And I don't think you're going to go wrong with any of these 3 guys because I think all of them have a very high floor. I don't know that they're going to have a ceiling or roof that you're going to be able to blow the top off and have Pro Bowl level players for 10 years, but that doesn't matter. I think that you're going to have very productive players right out of the gate. And the reason for that is all three of them will add an element to this offense we don't currently yet have. So we'll be able to maximize their skills relatively quickly. And isn't that what Carroll does best? Gets the best out of the skills you have to offer on the table. Well, that about does it for us today. Next week, I've got a live event scheduled. We're going to do the first round of the draft as a live stream. Please come on into the chat, ask questions, do some speculation with me. Let's dive into this draft and see if we can't do some figuring out of what players John Snyder might just be picking. It's always fun when he's at the helm. As well, if it goes good in that first round, I'll go ahead and live stream the next 2 days as well, because heck, I ain't got nothing to do. So, thanks for checking out another episode of the Hawk's Nest. Please do continue to watch and subscribe. And go Hawks.